Today's game is Ascari by Acis Edizioni. Acis is an Italian publisher. I played a game by them last year, Massena Delano. I enjoyed it. It was sort of like an epic game with some very long scenarios. This is a game with a different scope. It includes 5 scenarios that can be played on 4 maps. And these battles are not nearly as long as some of the battles in the previous game. These battles can be usually played in 1 or 2 hours. So much easier to set up and then to play. The topic of the game is one that hasn't been the subject of many war games as far as I know, which is the Italian battles in Africa during the Italian colonial enterprise at the end of the 19th century. So definitely a topic that I have not played games about it in the past, and a topic that I just welcome the opportunity to learn a little bit more about it by playing battles about it and by reading the material included in the game. So a lot of battles, an innovative topic, and very interesting mechanics in here. So let me show you how the game works. Then I want to tell a little bit about how some of the battles work. I want to give you a quick coverage of some of the scenarios, and then I will share my final conclusions with you. Turn structure is simplicity itself. First, the active player goes and moves any and all of his units. Units move up to the movement allowance, which is the number printed at the bottom right corner of the counters for combat units and bottom left for leaders. And the movement allowance will be modified by the terrain that the unit is covering while moving. At the end of movement, a unit that moved receives a moved -1F marker that indicates that the unit can still fire, because all units that have rifles can fire during the fire phase, but that unit will have a penalty of -1 on the die roll, unless the unit is stacked with a leader, because leaders prevent units from receiving certain markers, such as this one. So if there is a leader, the unit can fire without this penalty. Also, during movement, units can enter the X where enemy units are, and if they do so, then you resolve melee immediately. Melee is resolved during movement. You do not have to wait until all units have moved before you resolve melee. So those units will fight, one of the 2 units will have to retreat and probably take a step loss. And then if the moving unit still has movement points, that unit can keep moving. And you repeat that for all units that move. However, the inactive player does not just have to sit there and roll his thumbs, because this game does have opportunity fire. So as you are moving your units, the inactive player can use his units to execute opportunity fire against your units. And opportunity fire, just like regular fire, is more powerful at close range. So actually, if you're trying to enter the X of an enemy unit that hasn't used opportunity fire yet, then that unit may fire to you when you are adjacent, and that can be particularly dangerous. However, sometimes it will be useful to force the opponent to use opportunity fire, so that then you can overwhelm that opponent with the following charges of your units, so that the other units belonging to you can enter melee. As you can see, some of the units belonging to the Ethiopian player have yellow stripes. That means that those units do not have rifles at the beginning of the game, so they only can use melee during combat. They cannot fire during the rifle phase and the fire phase. But if a rifle unit is eliminated from the battlefield, then you replace it with a rifle marker that indicates the rifles that have been left behind in the battlefield, and now units that do not have rifles can appropriate those rifles, and if they grab the rifles that have been left on the ground, then they can use them, and starting from the following turn, that unit can fire during the fire phase. When you must resolve fire combat, you simply roll a die for the firing unit and you apply modifiers taken from this list. For example, Italians that are adjacent to at least another Italian unit get a positive modifier. Terrain may give a modifier. If the unit moved or participated in combat, then it has a penalty. A leader may help the unit with a positive modifier. Units that have a melee factor of 0, then these units are smaller in size and they have -1, and the melee factor is the number at the bottom left corner of the counters. Also, if you're firing using opportunity fire, also you have -1. You then look at this table that tells you the numbers to hits that change depending on nationality and range. At range 2, for example, Italians would hit with a modified 4, 5, or 6, and all other nationalities with a 5 or 6. At range 1, there's also the chance of having a modified 6, which is printed in black to indicate double hits. In this case, the target unit will take 2 step losses, otherwise all of the hits are 1 step loss. Artillery combat works in a very similar way. You roll a die for the firing artillery unit, you apply these other modifiers here. Also, artillery can use opportunity fire only when stacked with a leader, and even then it has a pretty steep negative modifier. But then you look at the numbers to hit, and of course artillery has better range than rifles and pretty devastating effects at close range, so it is much easier for artillery units to inflict double hits on the opponent. But the procedure is exactly the same. A slightly different procedure you use for melee. In melee, both players roll a die, they add the melee factor of the units involved in the melee, and other modifiers taken from this are the list, hate, whether or not a unit has a retreat marker also may modify the situation, terrain, presence of leaders, and in one of the scenarios only Italians get a positive modifier because of bayonet charges. You compare the two results. If you have the same modified values, then the active player unit retreats in the start hex. The active player is the attacker in a melee situation. Otherwise, if a number is higher and one is lower, then the player with the lower result will have to retreat and possibly also to take step losses. And this is pretty much how you resolve all combat situations in the game, and this is really how the game works. There are a couple of extra rules that I haven't covered, but not many. The game is pretty much like this. You move, you resolve melee during movement, then you fire with rifles and artillery, and then the game goes to your opponent, who goes to the same procedure, and you continue like this until a winner emerges from the battle. Battle of Agordat, where you have 4 Italian units and a single leader against a much larger number of dervish units. So the situation doesn't look too good for the Italians, but there are advantages. Mainly these advantages for the Italians come from the victory conditions that the dervish player must meet in order to win the game. The dervish player must exit 4 combat units from this edge here, or a single camel unit, or the dervish player must eliminate all Italian units. That means that either way the dervish player has to advance in this direction or against the Italians, and that will put the dervish units in range of the Italian rifles. So the Italian units have rifles, some of the units of the dervish player do not, they're spear units, and so they are easy targets as they are approaching the Italians. And that's one of the advantages. The Italian player also defends behind a river, very good to give an advantage against melee, so definitely the Italian player has a good defensive advantage, but on the other hand the number of dervish units is just so overwhelming. There definitely is a chance for the dervish player to be able to overwhelm the Italian units by sheer force of numbers. Another challenge for the dervish player is represented by these camel units here. One of them at least should be exited from the map, but the problem is that if one of those units is within 3 axes of an Italian unit, and the Italian unit has a line of sight on it, then you roll a die. And on a 3 or more, the women that are together with that unit rebel against the men of the dervish army, and they become, again, a unit of female rebels that now fights together with the Italian player. So there definitely are challenges for both players. The battle is interesting to play, pretty fun, and it turned out much closer than I expected it would be when I first looked at the setup. Battle of Koatit variant of a situation that we saw before, that is a smaller number of Italian units with better equipment, and they even have an artillery unit here in a good position. Now they're defending on top of a hill surrounded by ravines, but they are facing a larger number of enemy units, of Ethiopian units. In order to win the game, the Ethiopian player must accomplish one of the following before the end of the game, which is during this turn here on the turn track. The Ethiopian player must occupy at least 1 hex of the city of Koatit, or he must eliminate 10 Italian units, or he must occupy the HQ there on top of the hill and eliminate at least 6 units, or he can eliminate the leader Baratieri. Any of these conditions met before the end of the game will win the game for the Ethiopian player. The Italian player can win by holding out and preventing the retreat conditions for the opposing player to happen until the end of the game, or he can eliminate 22 Ethiopian units, or eliminate the Ras Mangasha, or take control of the camp belonging to Ras Mangasha. But since the attack will probably come from the Ethiopian player, and the Italian player may find it a good idea to hold a good position, then most likely the Italians will be on the defensive, at least in the initial part of the game. As you can see, there are challenges here for the Ethiopian player that can choose to launch another sort of like Rourke Rifts type of attack against the Italian weapons, this time literally going uphill, or trying to move around the Italian units to occupy the city. The cool thing is that the Ethiopian player may choose to switch his objectives as the game proceeds, and maybe trick the Italians into believing that he's trying to get one of the victory conditions and then go for the other one. Definitely another interesting scenario and very fun to play. I really have a positive impression of this game. I like the fact that there are different battles that can be played. This is a package with a good replay value and with maps that really offer different initial configurations, different terrain. There are specific rules that change from scenario to scenario. Definitely a good replay value there, even though you can clearly see what the common thread is, which is the common situation here is to have a smaller number of Italian units with better weapons and better coordination. So for example, the Italians' ability to use support fire, and on the other hand you have Ethiopian and Dervish units that can be extremely powerful in melee, can be devastating, but do not have rifles in many cases, but on the other hand, again, have overwhelming numbers. So you can expect charges of waves and waves of Ethiopian and Dervish units against the Italians that are just trying to desperately defending their position, trying to just hold out for as long as they can before they're completely overrun by the opponents. You can expect some mini Italian Rourke's Drift type of situation here. It kind of reminded me of that on a smaller scale. But still, if you are the Ethiopian Dervish player, expect high casualties, make peace with the fact that you will lose a huge number of men in your charges, but then if some survives and manages to inflict damages on the Italians, then there aren't many Italians there. Every little damage does matter and can definitely tip the balance of the battle in your favor. I like the mechanics. They come together very well. The overall experience of gameplay is very fluid, very smooth. The different parts of a turn, from movement and melee being part of movement and then fire, they all come together very well. The experience is really seamless. Last but not least, the game is very simple, very easy to pick up. You can teach it in 5-10 minutes. The battles are not too long to set up and play, so it is not a game that requires huge involvement, but it is a game that pays off. The battles are definitely fun to play, exciting. There is a lot of intense action, brutal action, yes, but you really have this gritty sense of this bloody, messy violent battle that's happening, and it delivers, thanks to that, a very strong historical feel. This is definitely a game that I enjoy. It is from a small publisher. I don't know if you'd ever heard about the publisher or the game before, and I hope that my review brings both the publisher and the game more visibility, because Ascari to me is a very good product, one that I would recommend if you're interested in the topic at all, or if you just want to play a tactical war game that is definitely intense, delivers some gripping moments, and last but not least, again, it is very easy to learn and to play.